Chapter 1. The first time he said, "You deserve better." The rain came down like a curtain, blurring the cracked pavement of the apartment complex's parking lot into a silver film. From behind a second-floor window, the streetlights fractured in the rivulets of water clinging to the glass. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of scorched soup and the echoes of a slammed door still vibrating through the floorboards. Casey stood in the kitchen, unmoving. His hands trembled around the edges of a cracked ceramic bowl he hadn't meant to drop. His glasses sat crooked on his nose from where they'd been shoved, and one of the lenses had a hairline scratch that made the world blur just a little more than usual. His soft brown eyes stared down at the mess on the tiled floor, the soup spreading like a bruise, broken pieces of porcelain blooming inside it. Behind him, the silence throbbed. Derek had stormed out moments ago after yelling about something. What had it been this time? The socks on the floor? The rice too sticky? Or maybe because Casey had asked timidly if he could visit his sister next month. The answer had been no, like it always was. Only this time, Derek's voice had cracked something deeper than usual. Casey bent slowly, mechanically, to clean. He didn't notice the blood until it smeared across his palm. He'd cut himself, shallowly, on one of the jagged edges of the bowl. He stared at the red streak with dull curiosity. Outside, the rain kept falling. The knock on the door came 10 minutes later. At first, Casey didn't move. No one visited. Derek didn't allow it. His friends were gone. His world shrunk into these four walls and whispered apologies. So when the knock came again, firmer, more official, his legs finally moved on their own. When he opened the door, the hallway light poured in, silhouetting the two uniformed officers. One of them stepped forward, the other hanging back with a quiet glance toward the stairwell. "Evening, sir," the man said. His voice was calm but firm. "We received a call from a neighbor. They heard shouting and something breaking. Are you all right?" Casey blinked up at him. The man was tall, easily over 6 feet, his frame broad and steady like a wall you could lean against. Rain dotted his shoulders and soaked the edges of his dark hair, which curled slightly near his temples. His jaw was square, but his eyes, storm gray and unexpectedly gentle, softened the sharpness of his features. "I'm fine," Casey said too quickly. "It was just an argument. It's nothing." The officer tilted his head, gaze lowering to Casey's split lip, the faint purple shadow near his cheekbone, the blood on his hand. "Sir, are you injured?" "No," Casey whispered, then winced. "Yes, I mean, it's nothing serious. I dropped a bowl. I'll clean it up. He's gone now." "Is that the man who lives here with you?" Casey nodded. His shoulders folded in on themselves. The officer didn't press, not yet. Instead, he shifted slightly, keeping his voice low. "My name's Caleb. What's yours?" "Casey." Caleb offered a brief, warm smile. "Casey, is it okay if I come in and check that everything's all right?" Casey hesitated, his body a taut line of uncertainty. But something in Caleb's tone, quiet, steady, nothing like Derek's booming commands, made him step back. The apartment was dim. A single lamp glowed in the corner. The soup still stained the floor. The air smelled like something forgotten on the stove. Caleb scanned the room with the trained ease of someone who'd seen too many places like this, too many men like Casey, too many nights where the rain drowned out the screams. "Did he hit you?" Caleb asked softly. Casey's eyes darted toward the door, as if expecting it to burst open again. "He didn't mean to. He gets upset. I say the wrong thing sometimes." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knelt, taking a clean towel from the counter and gently offering it. "This cut needs to be cleaned. May I?" Casey nodded, mute. Caleb took his hand with a kind of reverence Casey hadn't felt in years. He wrapped the towel around the bleeding palm, careful not to press too hard. His fingers were calloused, his movements precise but tender. "Casey," Caleb said after a pause, "you don't have to stay here." The words came like a whisper, but they cracked something open. Casey looked up, startled. I have nowhere else, and he said no one else would want someone like me. That I'm too quiet, too weird, too fragile." Caleb's voice was iron wrapped in velvet. "That's a lie, and even if it weren't, I'd still be standing here, wouldn't I?" Casey's breath caught, and Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plain white card. No police department branding. Just his name, and a number written in neat ink. He pressed it gently into Casey's uninjured hand. "This isn't protocol," Caleb said, almost apologetically. But I want you to have this. If you ever need help, real help, even if it's just someone to listen, call me. I'm not just a badge, I'm a person, and I see you." Casey's fingers curled around the card like it was gold. The second officer reappeared in the doorway, giving Caleb a nod. No visible danger, nothing to arrest for. Not tonight. "We'll be patrolling nearby," Caleb said as he stood. "Please, just think about what I said." Casey nodded slowly, too overwhelmed to speak. Caleb lingered one more heartbeat. Then he left, the door shutting gently behind him. Casey didn't move for a long time. Eventually, he walked to the bedroom. The lights were off. He didn't bother changing clothes. He slid under the blanket and curled into himself like he always did, spine pressed to the edge of the mattress, leaving space he was never allowed to fill. But tonight, before he turned off the lamp, he took the card from his pocket and stared at the name. Caleb Rise. The handwriting was firm, unshakable, like him. Casey hesitated. Then he slipped the card under his pillow. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain hit the window in endless rhythm. His lips stung. His hand throbbed, but something else ached deeper. A quiet, burning thing lodged under his ribs. It wasn't fear, not entirely. It was the dawning terror that maybe, just maybe, there was another kind of life out there. One with kindness, one with safety, one where he didn't have to be small to be loved. That night, Casey cried, silently, face to the pillow. The kind of crying that leaves no sound, just wetness on the sheets and a sob caught between ribs. He didn't cry because he was weak. He cried because for the first time in 3 years someone had seen him and told him he deserved better. Chapter 2. The Day I Finally Called for Help. The crack of splintering plastic sounded louder than thunder in the stillness of the apartment. Casey stared in frozen horror at the shattered remains of his laptop on the floor, his blueprint open on the screen, now flickering, corrupted, and dead. He hadn't backed up the file. He'd spent 3 weeks fine-tuning the design, staying up through the night and surviving on coffee and hope. It had been his proof that he could build something, that he was worth something. Now it lay in pieces, like everything else. Derek's voice was still ringing in his ears, venom laced with volume. "You think you're too good to listen? You think you're smarter than me? Maybe someone needs to remind you what happens when you forget who provides for you." Casey hadn't said a word, hadn't screamed, hadn't cried. He just stood there, barefoot, trembling. The front door slammed. Derek left. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the lingering taste of fear and ash. Casey moved like he was in water, slow and heavy. He crouched down beside the remains of the laptop, fingertips ghosting over the keys, as if he could piece it all back together with enough care. But his hands were shaking too hard. And something inside him cracked. Quietly, cleanly. He stood up, walked to the bedroom, and opened the drawer beside the bed. The card was still there, tucked under the pillow like a secret he was afraid to lose. Casey stared at it, at the name written in calm, steady ink. Caleb Rise. He didn't think. He didn't change clothes. He didn't pack a bag. He just grabbed his hoodie, slipped it over his t-shirt, and shoved the card in the front pocket. He stepped out into the overcast morning, the cold air hitting his face like a warning and a welcome. His socks soaked through in minutes. The sidewalk scraped his feet raw. Still, he walked. 3 miles. Through a neighborhood waking up to coffee and news, while his own world burned quietly behind him. By the time Casey stepped into the police station, he was soaked from the ankles up, hoodie clinging to his thin frame, eyes wide and unsure behind his fogged glasses. The woman at the front desk looked up from her computer, blinking. "Hi there, can I help you?" Casey swallowed. I need to speak with Officer Caleb Reyes. Please." She tilted her head. "He's not on shift until this afternoon. Is it an emergency?" Casey didn't answer. He looked like a ghost, his fingers curled tighter around the edges of his sleeves. The woman stood up immediately. 1 moment. Casey waited, standing, not sitting, not moving. He couldn't sit. His knees felt like glass, and if he sat, he feared he wouldn't stand again. 15 minutes later, Caleb walked through the double doors, jacket half-buttoned, hair damp like he'd just come from the shower. He saw Casey, and his expression changed in an instant, sharp concern melting into something deep and urgent. He crossed the room fast, but not too fast. Gentle, like everything about him. "Casey." Casey looked up. "I didn't know where else to go." Caleb's jaw clenched. Not in anger, never at him, but in silent fury at everything Casey had been through to end up here, barefoot and shivering. "You did the right thing," Caleb said, placing a warm hand on Casey's shoulder. "Come on, let's get you out of here." He led him to the back, where it was quieter, away from the patrol buzz and fluorescent lights. Caleb didn't ask questions right away. He just draped a dry blanket over Casey's shoulders and handed him a cup of tea that someone had miraculously conjured. Casey sipped without tasting. Caleb sat across from him, elbows on his knees, gaze steady. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" "My laptop," Casey said quietly. "He threw it. It had my designs. It's gone. All of it." Caleb didn't ask what else had happened. He didn't need to. Instead, he pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call someone. She's a friend. She helps people in situations like this. You don't have to go back there, okay? You have options now." Casey looked down at his lap. "Is this really happening?" Caleb's voice softened. "Yeah, it is." 15 minutes later, a woman burst through the station doors like a hurricane wrapped in a scarf and sneakers. Ruby was short, sharp, and unstoppable. Her curly black hair bounced with every expressive word, and she wore mismatched earrings shaped like tiny succulents. She practically sparkled. "So this is the brave man," she said, dropping to a crouch in front of Casey. "Hi, I'm Ruby. I'm here to help you start over, and I won't take no for an answer. You allergic to cats?" Casey blinked. "No? Perfect. The couch you're sleeping on tonight has a cat named Beans who will scream at you at 3 a.m., but also sleep on your chest like a heating pad. And I have chamomile tea and 10 different kinds of granola bars." Casey looked between Ruby and Caleb like they couldn't be real. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Ruby's voice gentled. "Because even a cactus blooms once it finds sun, sweetheart. And you've been living in shadow too long." They left together in Caleb's car, Casey still bundled in the too big blanket, Ruby talking non-stop in the front seat while Caleb drove silently, checking the rearview mirror every few minutes to make sure Casey was still there. The apartment was small but warm. A jungle of plants lined the windowsills, books were piled high beside the couch, the scent of cinnamon hung in the air. Casey stood in the doorway, frozen. Ruby nudged him gently. "You're safe now. You can breathe." Caleb excused himself, promising to return soon. Ruby helped Casey settle in, offering clean towels and fuzzy socks and a cup of tea he didn't remember finishing. An hour later, there was another knock. Caleb stood at the door holding a plastic bag of clothes, sweatpants, a hoodie, and a simple long-sleeved shirt. "They're mine," he said. "Wasn't sure of your size, but they should fit." Casey's fingers brushed Caleb's as he took the bag. For the first time, he didn't flinch. "Thank you," he said, voice quiet but steady. Caleb's mouth twitched into a smile. "Anytime." Later, while Ruby pottered in the kitchen humming a tune, Casey sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, fingers curled around the edge of the shirt Caleb had brought. It smelled like cedar and something warm. Safe. His mind flashed back to another night, months ago, when he'd asked Derek if he could get new socks because the ones he had were full of holes. Derek had laughed and said, "Be useful first, then maybe I'll buy you something." Now here he was, holding socks someone had brought him without being asked, without expecting anything in return. Small kindnesses, freely given, like sunlight in places that had only known cold. Caleb stood at the door again later that evening, ready to leave this time. Casey followed him out, feet quiet on the wooden floor. Caleb turned to say goodbye. But before he could, Casey looked up at him, hair slightly mussed, eyes tired, but no longer hollow. "Thank you," Casey said softly, "for showing up." Caleb's throat bobbed. "Always," he said, brushing his knuckles lightly against Casey's arm. "Whenever you need me." As Caleb walked down the steps into the fading light, Casey stayed at the window and watched him until he was gone. Something warm and trembling stirred in his chest. Hope, maybe. The kind that didn't hurt. Chapter 3. Freedom tastes like burnt pancakes and laughter. The scent of overwatered basil and laundry detergent had started to feel like safety. Ruby's apartment was small, packed with life. Plants dangled from shelves, notes were scribbled on sticky pads taped to the fridge, and her cat Beans had officially claimed Casey's chest as a nightly resting place. In the early mornings, before the sun had even thought about rising, Casey would sit on the tiny balcony with a cup of lukewarm tea and breathe. Not perfectly. Not deeply. But he was trying. Therapy had started 2 weeks ago. The first session left him hollowed out and shaking, but Ruby had been waiting with a blanket and mint hot chocolate. She didn't ask how it went. She just curled next to him on the couch, turned on a baking show, and let the quiet do the healing. Casey was still learning how to speak in full sentences about the past. But the therapist, Jules, was patient, calm, and never rushed him. "You survived," she'd said once. "That's already proof of strength." Caleb came by every few days, sometimes just for a minute, sometimes for longer. He never stayed unless invited, never hovered. He brought things, books, herbal tea, sketch pads. Once, a bright orange notebook with the words, "Build Something Beautiful," printed in simple black font on the cover. Casey had opened it that night and cried. One Friday morning, Caleb knocked with his usual polite rhythm. Ruby called out from the kitchen without even looking up. "Doors open, Officer Sunshine." Casey smothered a laugh as Caleb entered with a sheepish smile. "She's never going to stop calling me that, is she?" "Not a chance," Ruby chirped, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Caleb turned to Casey. "There's a community event today. At the center on Maple, they're hosting a volunteer fix-it day. People bring old electronics, furniture, whatever's broken. I thought, maybe you'd like to come." Casey blinked. "Me? You're an engineer," Caleb said gently. "I figured if anyone could bring things back to life, it's you." Casey hesitated. Crowds still made him nervous. The idea of failing in front of strangers, of trying and being told he wasn't good enough, curled anxiety around his ribs. But Caleb was watching him with quiet hope, not pressure. "I can come for a little while," Casey said softly. Caleb smiled. "That's all I hoped for." The community center was buzzing with low chatter, toolboxes, and the whir of drills. The tables were lined with toasters, radios, vacuum cleaners, everyday machines that had stopped working but hadn't been thrown away because someone still believed they could be fixed. Casey ran his hands along the table edges, careful and quiet. A volunteer handed him a half-busted radio with a hopeful smile. He sat at one of the workstations, opening the casing like it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Within 20 minutes, the radio crackled to life. A child clapped nearby. "Whoa, Mom, the music thing works again." Casey flushed, shy but proud. He repaired 3 more items before he even realized how much time had passed. Caleb watched from a distance, arms crossed over his chest, heart tugging with something warm and fierce. Casey was brilliant. Not just technically, but in the way he leaned down to explain to the little girl how her toy worked, in the way his shoulders uncurled with each passing moment, in the way he smiled like he didn't know he was allowed to. By the time the event ended, Casey's cheeks were flushed from the sun and his hands smudged with dust and solder. Caleb approached with 2 bottled waters and a grin. "You were amazing." Casey looked down, modest. It felt good, like I remembered who I used to be. Caleb offered him a hand, and for the first time, Casey didn't hesitate to take it. That night, Caleb insisted Casey come over. "Just for pancakes," he said. "I owe you for today." Casey eyed him skeptically. "Can you cook?" Caleb looked offended. "I can. Heat things." Ruby cackled from the living room, yelling, "You burnt oatmeal once." "Okay, that was one time." They drove in comfortable silence, music playing softly. Caleb's house was modest, warm, and smelled faintly of cedar and lemon. The walls held framed black and white photos, old buildings, cityscapes, a boy with his arms around a golden retriever. As Casey stepped inside, that same golden retriever ambled down the hallway, tongue lolling out in pure joy. "This is Samson," Caleb said. "He's old, lazy, and only listens to people who smell like granola." Samson walked straight past Caleb and flopped at Casey's feet. Caleb's jaw dropped. "Traitor." Casey giggled. It was small, brief, but it was laughter, real and unguarded. The kitchen was a mess within minutes. Caleb was a disaster with batter, mixing too fast, then too slow, and flipping a pancake that landed on the floor. Casey laughed until he had to sit down. "You're terrible at this," he managed between gasps. Caleb smirked. "I'm excellent at other things." Casey raised a brow, eyes sparkling. "Like what?" Caleb opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of juice, and dramatically announced, "Like hydration." Boom. Casey laughed again. The sound echoed in Caleb's chest like church bells. They ate slightly burnt pancakes with too much syrup and sat on the couch watching a black and white movie Caleb claimed was classic cinema, but was mostly just people dramatically fainting in ball gowns. Samson snored against Casey's leg. Caleb drifted off slowly, head leaning back, arms stretched across the couch. At some point, Casey realized he was the only one still awake. He turned off the volume, reached for the sketch pad in his bag, and began to draw. Lines came easily, blueprints of a solar-powered bookshelf lamp he'd been dreaming about. The numbers calmed him. The balance, the symmetry, the gentle hum of the pencil against paper. Caleb stirred beside him, murmuring something. Casey paused. Caleb turned his head slightly, still half asleep. Casey. It wasn't loud, just a whisper. Casey's breath caught. He set the sketch pad down, moved slowly to grab the folded blanket on the armrest, and covered Caleb with it. For a moment he hovered, watching the way Caleb's face softened in sleep, the way his hand twitched as if still trying to reach for something. Casey sat back, eyes misting. In the hush of the room, with Samson breathing rhythmically beside him, Casey whispered to no one, to everything. I think I'm finally starting to feel like a person again. He wasn't fully healed. He still had nights where he jolted awake with phantom hands and guilt like chains. But here, in Caleb's house, with burnt pancakes in his stomach and Samson's warmth pressed to his side, something inside him had begun to bloom. And for once, he didn't feel ashamed of it. Chapter 4. The first time he touched me without fear. It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon. The sun filtered lazily through Caleb's living room windows, casting golden patches across the hardwood floor. Casey had just finished sketching another draft of the solar lamp design, now curled up on the couch in one of Caleb's hoodies. Samson lay at his feet, snoring softly. Casey reached for his phone, intending to check the time. That's when he saw the text. You've made your point. Now come home. The words struck like a punch to the ribs. Another buzz. Another message. I won't ask again. We both know you need me. Casey's breath caught. He stared at the screen, his fingers frozen. His whole body locked up in that old familiar panic. Suffocating, paralyzing. The next message hit harder. I still have the lease in my name. You won't make it out there without me. It didn't matter that he wasn't living there anymore. It didn't matter that Ruby, Caleb, and the whole legal process had his back. Because the fear was muscle deep. Memory deep. He dropped the phone. Within minutes he was on the kitchen floor, his knees pulled to his chest, forehead pressed to the cool tile. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. He couldn't stop shaking. His chest was tightening, the walls folding in. He didn't hear Caleb come in, but he felt the warm hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle, grounding. Casey, Caleb said, kneeling beside him, voice low and steady. Hey, I've got you. You're okay. Casey flinched, unable to speak, his throat burned. I'm here, Caleb said again, thumb brushing softly against Casey's shoulder blade. He won't touch you. He won't hurt you. I swear it. I'll never let him near you again. It wasn't just words. It was a promise, solid as the man kneeling beside him. Caleb stayed like that for minutes, grounded, patient, unshaken. His presence was like a weighted blanket wrapped around Casey's panic. Eventually, the storm began to pass. Casey's breath slowed. His eyes burned with tears he couldn't remember starting. Caleb didn't move. Casey spoke, voice hoarse. I hate that he still gets in my head. That doesn't make you weak, Caleb replied. It means you're still healing. And healing's not a straight line. Casey leaned into Caleb's chest. The warmth there, steady, alive, pulled him from the fog. Caleb's hand settled on the back of his neck, cradling him carefully, like holding something precious that had been shattered too many times. Come with me this weekend, Caleb whispered. Let me take you somewhere quiet. Casey didn't even ask where. He just nodded. The lake house sat on the edge of the woods like it had always been waiting for them. Caleb's uncle had built it years ago, a cozy cabin nestled between pine trees and overlooking a still, glassy lake. The porch creaked when they stepped onto it, and the wind smelled like cedar and pine needles and old stories. Inside, the walls were lined with worn books and blankets. A fireplace sat quietly in the corner, and the kitchen was filled with mismatched mugs and the smell of cinnamon from the apple pie Ruby insisted they bring. Casey stood in the center of the living room, turning slowly in a circle. It's beautiful, he said. Caleb smiled. It's yours for the weekend. The first night, they cooked simple pasta and sat on the porch wrapped in thick sweaters. Caleb told him stories about camping trips and falling out of canoes. Casey laughed, cheeks pink from the cold and the ease that was starting to settle in his bones. They didn't talk about Derek. Not once. The next morning, Casey woke before the sun. He wandered into the kitchen, still in sleep-warmed clothes, hair tousled, feet bare. Caleb was already there, brewing coffee. The sight of him, barefoot in joggers and a thermal shirt, sleeves pushed up, hair damp, sent a flicker through Casey's chest he wasn't expecting. Caleb smiled when he saw him. "Morning, sunshine." Casey rolled his eyes, grinning softly. "That's Ruby's name for you. She got it from me." They shared coffee in silence, leaning against opposite counters. Then, as they moved toward the door, Caleb reached out instinctively, fingers brushing Casey's collar. "Wait, your tag's flipped." He adjusted it gently, smoothing the fabric back down. His knuckles lingered just a second longer than necessary. Their eyes met. Casey's breath hitched. Slowly, shyly, he reached out and fixed Caleb's collar in return. His fingertips trembled as they brushed against Caleb's skin. Neither of them moved. The air thickened. Caleb's expression softened, almost reverent. "I've wanted to hold you for weeks," he said, voice low, "but I told myself I'd wait, however long it takes. Not a second before you're ready." Casey stepped closer. He didn't speak right away, but his eyes glistened with unshed tears. Not fear this time, but something gentler. "I'm ready," he whispered. "I'm ready to feel something that doesn't hurt." Caleb exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. He didn't rush. He reached out and touched Casey's cheek, just a graze of his thumb like asking permission. Casey leaned into it, eyes fluttering shut. And then Caleb kissed him. It wasn't fireworks, it was warmth, like stepping into the sun after a long, cold season. His lips moved slowly, letting Casey set the pace, letting him feel every second of safety, of care, of want without demand. When Caleb pulled back, Casey pressed his forehead to his. "Stay. Always," Caleb whispered. They moved to the bedroom like slow-moving tides, every touch a question, every answer made of soft yeses and stilled breaths. Caleb undressed him with hands that didn't grab, but held. Casey explored Caleb's skin like it was the first time he'd been allowed to want. Caleb whispered his name over and over like a vow, his voice a grounding tether through every flicker of nerves and desire. Their bodies found rhythm, not frantic, not rushed, but reverent, healing, real. After, they lay tangled under the covers, the room lit only by the moonlight seeping through the curtains. Casey curled against Caleb's chest, one hand resting over the steady beat of his heart. Caleb kissed the top of his head. "You're safe," he murmured again, like a prayer. "And you're mine, if you want to be." Casey didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way his hands stayed over Caleb's heart said everything. Chapter 5. I don't belong to him anymore. The courthouse smelled like cold air and old wood. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, a quiet tension in the atmosphere that made Casey's hands go clammy despite the chill. He sat outside the courtroom on a bench with Ruby beside him, her red scarf a flash of fire in the sea of beige walls and beige suits. Caleb stood to Casey's left, arms crossed, body coiled with a protective stillness. Casey's name had already been called. His stomach twisted. He'd spent weeks preparing for this. Therapy sessions where he practiced saying Derek's name out loud. Late nights curled against Caleb's chest, whispering pieces of the truth into the dark, just to hear what it sounded like outside his own head. Still, nothing could fully prepare him for this moment. "You've got this," Ruby said gently, squeezing his hand. "We'll be right behind you." Casey nodded, but he didn't move until Caleb leaned in and said in a voice that went straight through the trembling in his chest, "You don't have to prove anything, but if you want to be heard, we'll make damn sure they listen." Casey walked into the courtroom with that warmth still echoing in his spine. The room was quiet, too quiet. Derek sat at the defense table in a tailored jacket, his expression unreadable. But his eyes tracked Casey like he was prey. For a split second, the old fear stirred. The ghost of the voice that once told him don't speak unless spoken to whispered in the back of his mind. Then he looked into the gallery and met Caleb's gaze. Caleb didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. "I'm here. He doesn't get to hurt you. You're not alone." Casey took the oath, sat in the witness box, took a breath. The prosecutor asked him to recount the first time Derek had controlled him, then the times he'd made him isolate from friends. The broken laptop, the bruises, the humiliation, the words that sliced sharper than fists. Casey answered them all, voice trembling but sure, until the defense attorney leaned forward and asked too smoothly, "You never left until recently, Mr. Reed. If it was really that bad, why didn't you leave sooner?" The question gutted him. Casey froze. His throat locked. His hands gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles went white. The courtroom felt smaller. His vision blurred. "You never would have survived without me." Derek's voice echoed in his memory. Casey's breathing faltered. Then he looked up. Caleb was watching him from the gallery. His hands were on his knees, his jaw set, his storm-gray eyes locked on Casey with steady, patient fire. Not pushing, not pleading, just waiting. Casey's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Because I thought it was love." Silence. Then he drew in a deeper breath. "Because he convinced me I was too fragile, too strange, too quiet, that I should be grateful anyone wanted me at all. I believed him until someone else looked at me and didn't see a burden. Just a man worth saving." The prosecutor nodded. "And now?" Casey turned his face fully to the courtroom, to Derek, to everyone. "He didn't love me. He just wanted to own something quiet." His voice gained strength, inch by inch. "But I'm not quiet anymore." The courtroom was still. Even the judge looked affected. When the verdict came in 2 days later, guilty on all charges, including domestic assault, coercive control, and emotional abuse, Casey sat frozen for a moment. Then Ruby let out a loud, teary, "Hell yes!" in the hallway as they left. Caleb laughed for the first time that day. Casey turned to him and collapsed into his arms. He didn't sob, not right away. He just held on. Like Caleb was the first thing in the world that didn't shift when everything else crumbled. That night, Caleb didn't ask where Casey wanted to go. He took him home. Not Ruby's couch, not a shelter, not a friend's spare bed. His own house. He opened the door and said, "You're not visiting. You live here now if you want to. You don't have to ask, not ever." Casey dropped his overnight bag just inside the door. Caleb turned to say something else, but the words died on his tongue. Casey was crying. Silent tears. Nothing dramatic. Just a slow, steady stream falling down cheeks that had held too much for too long. "I didn't think I'd make it," he whispered. "I didn't think I'd ever be free." Caleb stepped forward and took his face in his hands. "You're free now, and you're safe, and you're mine, if you want to be." Casey surged forward, pressing his mouth to Caleb's. This kiss wasn't hesitant. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and alive and hungry in a way that made Caleb shudder. They stumbled down the hallway together, lips never parting for long. Caleb kept murmuring his name like a lifeline. Casey's hands roamed, needing to touch, to claim, to feel. When they made it to the bedroom, they undressed each other in the low light of Caleb's bedside lamp. Every kiss was anchored, every caress made of years of silence finally breaking. Casey gasped Caleb's name against his throat, a soft moan like a prayer that meant safe, that meant free. They moved together like two people building a new language out of breath and heat and reverence. Later, tangled in the sheets, sweat cooling on their skin, Caleb pulled Casey close, lips at his temple. "You never belonged to him," Caleb whispered. "But if you'll have me, I want to belong to you." Casey tucked his face into Caleb's neck and smiled with tear-soaked lashes. "I already do." Chapter 6. The man who helped me heal is the man I get to love. 6 months later, the house felt full, not of things, but of life. Casey stood barefoot on the rooftop Caleb used to call that useless slab of concrete. Now, it was a greenhouse, a real one. Steel-framed, solar-lit, filled with planters of herbs and native flowers, their delicate stalks swaying in the breeze that swept down from the hills. The solar lights kicked on just as the sun began to dip. It wasn't perfect. 2 panels still needed recalibration, but it was theirs. A project born from late-night sketches, bickering over pot size, Caleb burning his hand with the soldering iron, and Samson stealing every glove they owned. And it was finished. Casey smiled, tightening one last wire. Down in the garden, Caleb was hunched over the carrots like they'd personally wronged him. He was in one of Casey's old hoodies, sleeves pushed up, soil streaked across his cheek. This was what happiness looked like. It didn't come all at once. It crept in, through quiet mornings, shared coffee, movie nights with popcorn and burnt edges, the first time Casey answered a phone call without flinching, the first time he laughed so hard he dropped a bowl and didn't panic when it shattered. It came through freedom. And in the months since Derek's sentencing, Casey had learned how to breathe again. He worked freelance now, designing eco-conscious lighting systems and smart grid schematics. Caleb had cleared a desk, the den for him, decorated it with a framed photo of Samson in a bow tie, and a sticky note that read, "Genius lives here." He also started teaching workshops at the community center, Fix-It Days, beginner coding classes, and recently, design therapy sessions for survivors. Ruby helped organize them. Sometimes she'd peek in through the glass and wink while mouthing something absurd like, "You're so hot when you build robots." She was still Ruby. Casey still packed Caleb's lunches, but Caleb had started leaving notes in them. Folded squares of paper tucked between the sandwich and a homemade cookie. "Smile, I'm thinking about you. Come home soon, I miss my favorite view. Samson says hi, also he ate your granola bar." Casey saved them all in a jar on his nightstand. That evening, as twilight turned the world dusky blue, Caleb called out from below, "Come down here a sec." Casey wiped his hands on his jeans and headed down the stairs, out into the garden. Fireflies had begun to flicker between the beds of lavender and rosemary. Caleb was standing by the sunflowers with something behind his back. "Why do you look like you're hiding contraband?" Casey teased. Caleb grinned, the dimple in his left cheek showing. "You know how I don't do big speeches? You do long rants about how tomatoes are liars." "Exactly. So I figured I'd skip the ring, the glitter, the dramatic music." Caleb stepped forward, pulled out a tiny terracotta pot with a green sprout sticking out. It was a baby sunflower. He held it out, fingers a little shaky. "Want to keep growing with me?" Casey stared at it, at him, heart swelling so big he thought it might burst. He nodded, choked by something too big to name. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes." Caleb pulled him in, kissed him in the middle of the garden with dirt on their hands and laughter in their mouths. Rain began to fall, soft, cool. Caleb looked up. "Well, that's just cinematic." Casey leaned in again. "Don't run." "I wouldn't dream of it." They kissed in the rain, on purpose this time, soaked through in seconds, surrounded by herbs and vegetables and things they'd grown together. Back inside, they peeled off wet clothes and wrapped themselves in towels, dripping all over the hardwood. Caleb started the fire. The flames cracked and snapped as they collapsed onto the rug in front of it, warmth blooming against their damp skin. Casey crawled into Caleb's lap, straddling him, fingers tracing the edge of Caleb's jaw. Their mouths met again, slower now, softer. Every kiss was a continuation of months of gentle touches, quiet understanding, and shared vulnerability. They made love there, on the rug, wrapped in firelight and trust. It wasn't hurried. It was teasing, reverent, filled with smiles and breathy laughter. Casey pressed kisses to Caleb's collarbone, to his chest, to the space behind his ear that made him groan. Caleb's hands were steady, always asking, never taking. Casey whispered his name like it was sacred. Afterward, tangled together on the floor, still flushed and grinning, they reached for the closest blanket, only to find Samson had stolen it and was now curled smugly in the center of the couch. Caleb glared. "Traitor." Casey laughed, deep and free, curling tighter into Caleb's side. "He's on my side now. Deal with it." The fire popped. Caleb kissed Casey's temple, his shoulder, the inside of his wrist. He didn't say much. He never needed to. They stayed there long after the rain stopped, long after the fire died down, long after the world outside quieted. Casey never thought love could be a rescue, a rebuilding, a revolution. But every morning, Caleb kissed his scars like they were sacred. And every night, Casey whispered back, "I'm yours, hero."